Imagine waking up one day to find that every decision you've ever made, your job, your relationships, the city you live in, even the clothes hanging in your closet feels like it belongs to someone else, as though you've been quietly living a life scripted by an unseen author, applauded by strangers, but hollow in your own chest. You look in the mirror and don't see a person. You see a well-practiced performance, smiling, efficient, liked, respected, but behind your eyes there is only silence. A silence that once held whispers. Whispers that used to tug at you late at night, in between the tick of the clock and the turning of dreams. But now, nothing. Just a dull hum, the machinery of a life that runs without you. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. First it was small, pretending to agree in meetings to keep the peace, staying quiet at dinner when your heart screamed leave, choosing what was safe when your spirit begged for the wild. You told yourself you were being rational, responsible, a grown-up, and maybe you were. But with every compromise, you heard that voice, your voice, just a little less, until one day it stopped speaking altogether. Or perhaps it didn't. Perhaps you just stopped listening. Have you ever wondered what that voice was? The one you silence with podcasts, drown beneath to-do lists, scroll away on your phone until your thumbs hurt. The one that speaks not in language but in sensation, aching in your chest, the restlessness in your legs, the tension that won't ease no matter how long you sleep. It doesn't scream. It waits, like an old friend in a distant room, waiting for you to stop pretending you don't remember its name. But ignoring it comes at a cost. Because here's the truth you don't want to face. Every time you silence your inner voice, you become a little more fluent in a language that doesn't belong to you. You start saying things you don't believe, wanting things you don't need, loving things that don't love you back, and it works for a while, until one day you're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering why the life you built with such careful precision feels like a cage padded with luxury, or why success tastes like ash, or why being fine feels like a betrayal you can't quite name. That's the paradox, isn't it? We spend our lives building upward, more achievement, more validation, more admiration only, to discover that we've been climbing a staircase in the wrong building. We were never supposed to get here. We were supposed to listen, not just to logic, not just to fear, but to the subtle compass inside the one that doesn't always make sense, that leads us into uncertainty, discomfort, change, the one we dismissed as impractical, childish, unreliable, dangerous. But what if that voice was the only real thing you've ever had? What if the chaos outside, the noise, the opinions, the pressure to conform is nothing compared to the damage done by muting what is true within? What if your anxiety, your disconnection, your quiet despair is not a malfunction, but a message? What if ignoring your inner voice doesn't just cost you peace, it costs you your life? Not your breath, your life, that vivid, raw, irreplaceable existence that was meant for you and you alone, the one that pulses just beneath the surface, waiting for you to claim it. So ask yourself, when did you stop listening? Why did you choose silence? And what did it take from you? The world is full of people who look alive but feel dead inside. People who perform happiness like it's a job. People who smile with their mouths while their souls scream for air. You see them every day. Sometimes you are them, but deep down you know the truth. You remember the voice. You remember what it used to tell you, even if it's faint, even if it's been years. The question is no longer what is the voice. The question is what happens when you ignore it for too long. Because the price of silence is not comfort, it's amnesia. You forget who you are, and once you forget, what's left to lose? Now we go deeper into the hidden root, the ancient cause beneath the modern numbness, the war between the false self and the forgotten soul. You weren't born with silence inside. When you were young, the inner voice wasn't a whisper, was thunder. It guided your steps toward joy and pulled you away from harm with the unfiltered certainty of instinct. You knew when something felt wrong. You knew when something felt right. You didn't need to explain it. You didn't need approval. You simply knew. But over time, the world taught you to doubt that knowing. At first it was subtle. Don't cry, you're fine. That's not polite. Be realistic. That's not how the world works. You were told again and again that your feelings were inconvenient, your instincts unreliable, your imagination childish. Slowly, what you felt was replaced by what you were told. What was real gave way to what was acceptable, and the inner voice began to retreat, like light fading beneath heavy clouds. This process has a name. Carl Jung called it the formation of the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. It's not inherently bad. We all need a social self. We adapt to belong. But the problem arises when the mask becomes the face, when we begin to believe we are the persona, and forget the wild, unfiltered self beneath it. That self, the one you buried, is what Jung called the true self, and its voice never stops speaking, even if you've stopped listening. But this isn't just a Jungian metaphor. It's a psychological pattern embedded in the fabric of modern existence. As children, we are conditioned by families, schools, religions, media to seek external validation and suppress internal dissonance. We're rewarded for compliance, punished for authenticity. We learn to trade our truth for approval, our instincts for applause, and so we fracture. One part of us smiles. The other part watches, screaming silently behind the eyes. Nietzsche warned of this fracture in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, when he spoke of the last man, a human so domesticated, so dulled by comfort and conformity, that he no longer feels the hunger of the soul. He no longer risks, no longer rebels. He merely exists, cushioned by entertainment, routine, and shallow contentment. A man who has forgotten how to hear himself, and yet, beneath that numbness, the self remains aching to be remembered. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that human suffering stems from the will to deep, blind striving at the core of our being. But what happens when that will is muted? When the striving becomes directionless, replaced with hollow ambition, dictated not by inner necessity but by societal scripts? We end up chasing goals that aren't ours, careers we don't care about, love stories that aren't love, success that feels like failure dressed in gold. We become, in Viktor Frankl's words, existentially frustrated, not because life lacks meaning, but because we've stopped listening to our meaning. This disconnection creates a slow, corrosive anxiety, not the sharp kind, like fear, but the heavy, ambient kind, the kind you feel when the room is quiet, the kind that makes you scroll for hours, eat without hunger, binge on noise, just to avoid sitting still with yourself. And yet, beneath it all, the inner voice never disappears. It waits. But why do we ignore it? Because listening requires courage, because the voice rarely says what's easy, because it often demands that we tear down the life we've carefully built, because it doesn't care about comfort, approval, or certainty. It only cares about truth. And truth is dangerous. Truth says you're in the wrong relationship, even if you've been together 10 years. Truth says your job is killing your soul, even if it pays well. Truth says you're not who you pretend to be, even if everyone loves the act, so we suppress it, deny it, distract ourselves from it, and the longer we do, the quieter it gets. Until one day we can't even remember what our voice sounds like. That's when the symptoms begin. Chronic fatigue, restlessness, creative block, emotional numbness, feeling off but not knowing why, moments of unexplained sadness or dread, like your soul is whispering, "This isn't it." Modern psychology has words for this: burnout, dissociation, high-functioning depression. But labels only explain the what, not the why. The why lies deeper, in the loss of alignment between who we are and how we live. Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to avoid existential freedom. We pretend we have no choice. We blame circumstance. We say, "This is just how life is." But deep down, we know better. We always know, and that knowledge buried unspoken is the source of our suffering. So here we are, a society that celebrates surface and punishes depth, a culture that confuses productivity with purpose, a generation that performs wellness while quietly unraveling. We wear smiles like armor, post curated moments while falling apart in silence. We are more connected than ever, yet more isolated from ourselves, because the true disconnection isn't digital, it's internal. It's the rift between the voice within and the life without, and the cost of that disconnection. You forget what you love, you forget what matters, you forget who you are. But worst of all, you forget that you chose this, not because you were weak, but because you were afraid of losing the people who only love your mask, afraid of stepping into the unknown, afraid of what your voice might say if you really listened. But the voice does not go away. It waits. It always waits. And the longer you ignore it, the more it will rebel in your body, in your mind. In your quiet moments of truth. The self does not die quietly. It breaks through, or it breaks you. And so the question remains, what does a life look like when lived out of alignment? What happens when you build your identity on silence? What is the hidden cost of pretending not to hear? Let's peel back that layer next. Let's see how the ignored inner voice reshapes your world without you even knowing. Subtly, invisibly, until it owns you. You don't feel the shift at first. Ignoring your inner voice doesn't come with alarms. No explosions, no warnings. Just a subtle misalignment, single degree off true north. But over time, 1 degree becomes 10. 10 becomes 40. Eventually you look up and realize you're a lifetime away from where you were meant to be. And by then, you've built too much to turn back. The job, the house, the relationships, the expectations. A beautiful prison made of everything you once thought you wanted. This is how it begins, not with failure, but with success that feels hollow. Not with crisis, but with the quiet weight of waking up every morning wondering, is this all there is? You begin to notice it in small moments. A friend laughs, and you smile, but something inside you feels tired, like you're watching life from behind glass. You receive praise, and instead of joy, there's a flicker of guilt because you know the person they admire isn't quite real. You accomplish something significant, and the only thing you feel is the absence of feeling. It's not burnout. It's not depression. It's estrangement from yourself. And yet, it gets harder to admit, because from the outside, everything looks fine, or even great. This is what makes the consequences so dangerous. They don't shout, they seep, like smoke through cracks. They embed themselves into your habits, your thoughts, your relationships, until the numbness becomes the new normal, until you stop expecting anything more. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, the slow erosion of belief in your own agency. You tell yourself nothing can change, that your discontent is just part of adulthood, that everyone feels this way, and maybe they do, but that doesn't make it right. It just makes it epidemic. Over time, this quiet disconnection reshapes your brain neurologically. Your brain adapts to the roles you play. Neural pathways strengthen around repeated behaviors. If you ignore your inner voice long enough, your brain rewires itself around the false self. The mask becomes muscle memory soon. You don't even notice the dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, a term coined by psychologist Leon Festinger, describes the mental discomfort we feel when our actions conflict with our beliefs. But here's the catch. When that discomfort persists long enough, and we don't change our actions, the brain starts changing our beliefs instead. You convince yourself you like the job. You tell yourself the relationship is good enough. You rationalize your silence. You rewrite your truth to match your reality, because to admit the truth would mean confronting everything you've built on a lie, and so the illusion deepens. But illusions are fragile. They demand constant maintenance. This is why you keep yourself busy, why stillness makes you uneasy, why silence feels unbearable. Because silence is where the voice lives, and you're terrified it might still be there. This is why people overschedule, overshare, overstimulate. It's not a love of distraction. It's fear of what the distraction is hiding. The voice doesn't vanish. It goes underground, and when it does, it speaks in symptoms. Anxiety is often your inner voice screaming through a locked door. Procrastination, a rebellion against tasks that don't align with your true will. Irritability, the friction of living, a life that betrays your essence. You start making poor decisions, not out of foolishness, but because you're no longer guided by your own compass. You rely on external cues, trends, opinions, expectations, and they change like the wind, so you feel lost, unmoored, as though something essential has been misplaced, and you can't quite remember what it was. This misalignment affects more than just your emotions. It warps your relationships. When you're disconnected from your inner truth, your connections with others become performative. You say what you're supposed to say, you do what's expected, but you don't feel seen, because the self you're presenting isn't the self that longs to be known. People love the version of you that's polished, agreeable, predictable, and you let them, because being authentic might mean being rejected. But here's the tragedy. Even when you are loved, it doesn't feel real, because deep down, you know they're not loving you. They're loving the version you've curated, and so every compliment feels hollow. Every intimacy feels incomplete. Every connection feels counterfeit. You become lonely in a room full of people, not because no one is with you, but because you're not with you. This is the ultimate price of ignoring your inner voice. You become invisible to yourself, and once that happens, anything can fill the void. Advertising steps in, offering you false identities. Culture offers you roles to play: consumer, competitor, influencer, believer, follower. Algorithms shape your preferences before you even realize you have them. You stop asking what you want. You start wanting what you're told. Desire becomes data. Personality becomes branding. Even your rebellion is packaged and sold back to you as a lifestyle. And in the quiet moments between scrolling, between obligations, between tasks, you feel it, that flicker, that unease, that ache, like something inside you still remembers the sound of your own truth. But the longer you suppress it, the more dangerous it becomes, because the soul will not be ignored forever. It will sabotage your plans. It will collapse your comfort. It will whisper through your grief, your heartbreak, your longing. It will erupt when you least expect it, in panic attacks, in breakdowns, in midlife crises that aren't really about age, but about awakening. Because deep down, your soul knows this isn't your life. You borrowed it. You built it from blueprints handed to you by others. But it was never yours. And the longer you stay in it, the more it decays from within. The question is not whether you'll hear the voice again. You will. The real question is, will you recognize it when it speaks? Or will you be so far gone that truth sounds like madness and freedom feels like fear? It doesn't have to end that way. There is another path, but it demands a kind of rebellion, not against the world, but against the silence within. It's time to remember what was forgotten and to risk everything for what's real. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire and protest. Sometimes rebellion is quieter. It's the moment you stop lying to yourself. The second you say, I can't do this anymore, and mean it not as a dramatic flourish, but as a sacred vow. A quiet revolution, born not of rage, but of fatigue, of grief, of finally recognizing the cost of silence. Because breaking free isn't about burning everything down in one sweeping gesture. It's about reclaiming your life one truth at a time, and it starts the moment you decide to listen again, not to the world, not to the voices around you demanding compliance, performance, perfection, but to the whisper you buried long ago, the one that says, this is not who you are. The one that still remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. This act of turning inward, of choosing inner truth over external validation, is radical. It's the opposite of everything society teaches you. Society tells you to climb. The inner voice tells you to descend into yourself. Society tells you to optimize. The inner voice tells you to feel. Society says, be more. The voice whispers, be you. But you can't hear it unless you're willing to slow down. Stillness is the first act of rebellion, because stillness forces confrontation with your pain, with your boredom, with your forgotten desires. It strips away the distractions, leaving only what's real. It's no coincidence that many spiritual traditions, from Buddhism to mysticism to indigenous wisdom, center around silence. Because in silence, the soul re-emerges. But silence is not comfortable. It won't flatter you. It will show you every place you've betrayed yourself, every choice made from fear, every yes that should have been a no, every version of you you've invented, just to survive. And that's where the real work begins, because breaking free isn't just about listening, it's about responding. It's about making decisions that align with what you hear, even when they make no sense on paper, even when they cost you money, approval, relationships, comfort. That's what makes it hard. You will lose things. You may lose people. You may lose the identity you've spent years, CURTING, but what you gain is everything that was ever real. This is the paradox at the heart of transformation. You must let go of who you think you are in order to become who you truly are. Nietzsche called it the death of the false self, the moment the caterpillar dissolves into chaos before becoming the butterfly. That middle place, the void, is terrifying, but it's sacred. It's where rebirth happens. And this isn't abstract theory. This is your life. It means making choices, not from fear, but from alignment. It means walking away from situations that look good but feel dead. It means saying yes to things that terrify you, simply because something deep inside says, this is right. It means trusting yourself even when the world calls you reckless, selfish, or strange. The truth is, you'll never be universally understood when you live from your inner voice, because your truth is yours alone. And most people have forgotten theirs. But that's the point. You weren't born to be understood by everyone. You were born to be you. And the moment you start embodying that truth, something changes. The anxiety softens. The numbness fades. Synchronicities start happening. People who feel like home enter your life. Opportunities that align with your soul begin to appear not because you manifested them through positive thinking, but because you finally made space for what's real. You begin to feel again, not just joy, but grief, rage, wonder, depth. You're no longer afraid of your own emotions, because you know they're messengers, not enemies. You learn to distinguish between the voice of fear and the voice of truth. Fear says, what if it all goes wrong? Truth says, it already is. Fear clings. Truth releases. Fear demands certainty. Truth requires surrender. And surrender is the gateway. It doesn't mean passivity. It means devotion to the voice within, to the path that emerges one step at a time. You stop needing a 5-year plan. You stop performing success. You start living moment to moment, guided by something deeper than logic. And that's when the magic begins. Because alignment creates momentum. Every time you act on your inner voice, you strengthen it. The signal gets louder. The path gets clearer. The fear gets smaller. It's like tuning a radio. At first, it's static, faint signals buried beneath noise. But the more you adjust, the more precise the frequency becomes, until one day it's crystal clear. You don't have to figure it all out. You just have to keep listening and keep choosing. Choose the job that feels like an expression, not a sentence. Choose the relationship that nurtures your soul, not just your ego. Choose the stillness that reveals, not the noise that distracts. Choose what feels like truth, even when it's inconvenient, uncertain, or unpopular. That is the rebellion, and it is holy. It's not just personal, it's political, existential, spiritual, because a person who lives from their inner voice cannot be controlled. They don't chase trends. They don't play roles. They don't seek permission. They simply are, and their very presence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to others everything they've forgotten in themselves. That's the final irony. When you live your truth, it doesn't isolate you. It frees everyone around you, because authenticity is contagious. It cracks the collective hypnosis. It says, you don't have to keep pretending either. And so the rebellion spreads, one voice at a time, one truth at a time. one life reclaimed from silence. And what lies on the other side of this rebellion? Something deeper than freedom. A clarity so profound it changes everything. A revelation that reframes all your past suffering, all your detours, all your silence. Everything, finally, makes sense. It doesn't hit you like lightning. There's no trumpet, no choir, no grand cinematic moment where everything suddenly makes perfect sense. The ultimate truth comes quietly. It arrives the way dawn touches the edge of a windowsill, soft, unassuming and undeniable. You're walking one day, just walking, no agenda, no distraction. And then, out of nowhere you feel it. A strange familiarity, a return. Like remembering a song you used to hum in childhood. Like waking from a dream you didn't know you were in. And you realize you are you again. Not the version people liked. Not the version you curated. But the raw, trembling, luminous self beneath it all. And it is enough. Not because it's perfect, not because it has all the answers, but because it is real. That's the truth you were always running from, that the voice inside you was never your enemy. It was your compass, your anchor, your origin, your home, the discomfort you spent years avoiding. That was the cost of abandoning yourself, the restlessness you numbed. That was the soul knocking. The fatigue, the sadness, the quiet despair. They weren't flaws to be fixed. They were alarms, your body and spirit screaming, you are not living your truth. But now you see it clearly. Every breakdown was an invitation. Every lost relationship was a clearing. Every empty success was a question. Is this really who you want to be? And the answer, the one you always knew but never dared speak, was no. Because you were never meant to live a life that felt safe but hollow. You were meant to feel everything, to risk everything, to burn every falsehood to the ground and dance in the ashes of what no longer serves you. And in that destruction, something astonishing happens. You don't just become someone new. You remember who you always were before fear, before conditioning, before silence. That is the ultimate truth. The voice inside you was never a whisper from the future. It was a memory from before you forgot. The child who knew what they loved. The teenager who asked too many dangerous questions. The version of you that laughed too loudly, loved too fiercely, dreamed too wildly. They never left. They were buried under years of noise, but they were never lost. And now every step you take is a return, not to innocence, but to essence, not to naivety, but to clarity, not to a past self, but to a self that always was quietly watching, patiently waiting. And when you live from that place, the world changes. You don't chase things anymore. You attract what aligns. You don't strive for meaning. You radiate it. You no longer need others to understand you, because you understand yourself. And that is the greatest peace you'll ever know. You stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, what feels true? You stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what if I never try? You stop asking, what will they think? And start asking, what do I think? You become dangerous in the most beautiful way, because you are no longer programmable, no longer manipulable, no longer compliant in your own suppression. You speak, and your words have weight not because they're clever, but because they come from soul. You walk into a room, and people feel it, not the ego, but the energy. You look in the mirror, and you see someone you trust, and that is freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be exactly who you are. No apology, no performance, no permission. This is the paradox. The voice you spent so long avoiding was the only voice that ever knew the way. And when you finally follow it, you don't just change your life, you change the very lens through which you see life. You realize that every person is walking around with a buried voice, a forgotten truth, a sacred self trying to break through the noise. You start listening differently, speaking differently, loving differently. You become an invitation, not through advice or persuasion, but through embodiment. You show, simply by being, that it is safe to be real, that the path of truth, while hard, is holy, that the inner voice is not a burden, but a blessing. And here's the final truth. The voice never really needed you to listen for its sake. It always knew who you were. It was you who needed to hear it, so you could remember who you are. And now you do. You remember that your soul is not a problem to solve, but a truth to express. You remember that your life is not a checklist, but a canvas. You remember that your voice is not small, not crazy, not wrong. It is sacred, it is sovereign, it is yours. So listen, not just once, not just now, every day, every moment, especially when it's hardest, because the voice never disappears. It's the one thing in this world that is always faithful to you, even when you betray it, even when you doubt it, even when you forget it for decades. It waits, and when you finally return, it does not punish, it does not shame. It simply says, "Welcome back. We've got work to do."